Picture this scene in Vietnam, back in 2024. A single man walking completely barefoot, wearing a simple robe made of patches, starts to draw a crowd. First it's hundreds, then it's thousands, until it becomes this massive spiritual procession that literally brings the country to a halt and gets the whole world watching.
So the big question is, how? How on earth did one lone pilgrim manage to ignite this enormous nationwide movement? Well, let's get into it and really unpack the incredible story of the man they call Thich Minh Tuệ. To really get what's going on here, we have to look past that iconic robe for a minute and understand the man himself. Because believe it or not, he lived a totally normal, conventional life before all of this began.
Before he was a monk, his name was Lê Anh Tu. Born in 1981, he did everything you'd expect. Graduated from Forestry College, finished his 3 years of mandatory military service, and then he got a job as a land surveyor. And that last part is really interesting, right? His whole job was literally about drawing lines on the earth, defining who owned what piece of property. Some have pointed out that dealing with material possessions so directly might have actually been the very thing that pushed him toward his spiritual path.
And then, in 2015, he just made this unbelievable choice. He walked away from absolutely everything, his job, his house, his family, to become a monk. Now, he did try living in a traditional monastery for a little while, but he found that it just wasn't for him. The structure, even the relative comfort, it didn't feel right. He was looking for something purer, something much more demanding. And that path he was looking for? It was a return to one of the most hardcore forms of Buddhist practice, an extreme kind of asceticism that you almost never see in the modern world. He decided to follow what's known as the Dhutanga, which are the 13 ascetic practices. Now, this is a path that's laid out in the oldest Buddhist texts, and it has one single purpose: to completely cut off your attachment to the material world so you can purify your mind. It's kind of like the spiritual version of extreme endurance training. And this really gives you a sense of just how serious he is. He eats just one meal a day, and only what he receives from begging. His alms bowl is famously a repurposed rice cooker pot. He will not touch money, period. His robes are pieced together from scraps of cloth he finds, often in cemeteries. He sleeps outside wherever he can find a spot, graveyards, empty fields, and he only travels by walking barefoot. But maybe the most telling detail of all is that he calls himself Khan, which means child, when speaking to anyone and everyone he meets. It's a sign of complete and total humility. So this incredibly simple, yet totally radical way of life created a huge following among the public. But as you can probably guess, it also put him on a collision course with Vietnam's official religious establishment.
Now, this walk across the country in 2024, this was actually his fourth one. The first three were pretty quiet, mostly done in anonymity, but this fourth time, something was different. Social media got a hold of his story, and his journey just exploded online, turning his quiet, solitary walk into a national spectacle that millions were following every day.
As his fame just blew up and thousands of people started physically following him, creating these massive processions on the highways. Well, the official Vietnam Buddhist Sangha, that's the only state-recognized Buddhist organization in the country, they felt they had to do something. And what they did was issue a formal public rejection of him. So the official Sangha basically said, he's not a real monk because he's not one of us. But for the Vietnamese public, this created this really stark contrast. In one corner, you have Thich Minh Tuệ, who owns literally nothing and is living out the Buddhist teachings in the most direct way possible. And in the other corner, people had seen reports of some officially recognized monks living in luxury, commercializing religious services. This contrast really hit a nerve, and it helps explain why so many people started to see Minh Tuệ as the real deal. The whole situation was just becoming unmanageable. You had these massive, disorganized crowds sweltering in the summer heat. It was a recipe for disaster. And tragically, it didn't take long for disaster to strike. So look at how quickly this escalated. The official rejection from the Sangha comes out on May 16th. Just 2 weeks later, on May 30th, a 47-year-old man who was following him dies from heat stroke. That tragedy was all the justification the authorities needed to step in. On June 3rd, they announced that Thich Minh Tuệ had voluntarily decided to stop his pilgrimage. Then, a few days after that, he shows up on state TV, asking everyone to please not gather so he could just continue his practice in peace. And just like that, he disappeared from public view. For a while, it seems like that was the end of the story. But his journey was far from over. It was actually about to go from being a national phenomenon to a global spiritual quest.
In December of 2024, he quietly left Vietnam. Along with a small group of other pilgrims, he crossed the border to continue his barefoot journey. Only this time, he was going global. His goal now is just breathtaking. The plan is to walk across Southeast Asia, down through Malaysia and Sri Lanka, and finally arrive in India, the very land where the Buddha himself lived and taught. And what's his final destination? The remote, quiet solitude of the Himalayas, where he hopes to finally practice his asceticism, far away from all the crowds and all the controversy. Throughout this entire crazy saga, his message has been so simple and so consistent. He's never claimed to be a saint or a master or anything special at all. In his own words, he just says, "I am just a citizen learning to follow the Buddhist teachings." And it's that deep, profound humility that, ironically, became the source of his unbelievable influence. And all of this just leaves us with one final lingering thought. This man's quest for a simple, detached life has forced him to literally walk across continents. So, what does it say about the world we live in when trying to live the simplest life requires the longest, hardest journey of all?